Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at shell permissions. In a Linux system, we can have multiple users. That's why we need shell permissions to keep privacy of one user from the other. So we might have a file and we want to give a certain user the ability to read, write, and execute a file. And we might want to give another user an ability to only read the file. So that is why shell permissions in a Linux system are important. So we're going to look at different files that have different permissions, and we'll also see how to change permissions of a certain file. So in this directory, we're going to use the ls command with the long format. So if we type in ls with the long option, it's going to give us this display. So let's get into the permissions. Here, the first thing you're going to see is some of them have hyphens when at the beginning and the others have a D at the beginning. What this stands for is if it's a hyphen at the beginning, it means you're dealing with a file. If it's a D in the beginning, that means you're dealing with a directory. So here we have 4 files and 1 directory. That is the first information we get from the long format. Next, we're going to look at Next, we're going to look at the different sets of permissions. The first set of 3 permissions is going to stand for the owner of the file, so what the owner of the file can do. And the second set of 3 stands for what the group can do. That means if certain users are in a group together, so if they're in that group, so they're going to have their own permissions. And finally, you're going to have the last set of 3, which represents what other users other than the users in the group and other than the owners of the file can do. So in the first file, if we look at it, we can see that the owner of the file can read and write the file, but it cannot execute it. We can see that the group also has read and write permissions, and the other users have only read permissions. You can look at the following image, which clearly shows what each set of 3 permissions stand for. Now, the next thing we're going to see is how you can change permissions of a file. So, for example, let's say we wanted to add executing permissions to the owner of the isupper.c file. So we're going to be using a Linux command, which is change mod. So it's going to change the permissions of the file we give it. In our case, we want to give the owner execution permissions. So the owner we're going to represent with O, and we want to add a permission. So we're going to use a plus sign, and we're going to give it the permission we want to add, which in our case is execute, which is represented by an X. Next, we're going to give it the file name, which is 0-isupper.c. And now if we list it in long format, actually O stands for other users. So actually we added executing permissions to other users. In order to change the permissions of the owner, we're going to use the identifier U, which means we're going to do U plus X followed by the name of the file. Now if we list it in long format, we can see that we've added executing permissions to the owner of the isupper file. So let's say we wanted to take away permissions. So let's say we wanted to take away the write permissions of the group that owns the file. So what we're going to do is use the change mod command, and we represent the group by G, and we want to take away, so we're going to use the minus operator, and we want to take away their write permissions, and we're going to put in the file name. And we're going to press enter. Let's just clear our terminal and list the files. As you can see, now the group does not have writing permissions. So this is how you can change the permissions of a file. If you want, you can change the owner and the group permissions together. So you can do that by using change mod again, and you're going to put in, so let's say we want to take away reading permissions from the owner of the file and from the group. So we're going to have U and we're going to have G. Then we're going to take away, so we're going to use the minus operator, and we want to take away their reading permissions. And finally, we're going to put in the file name, and we're going to list it again. As you can see, the owner of the file and the group no longer have reading permissions. Another way you can change permissions is by providing a set of 3 numbers. We're going to be using numbers in base 2, so let's see how that works. So when we give it permissions by numbers, we're going to provide it with 3 numbers. So the last number is going to stand for 2 to the power of 0. The one in the middle is going to stand for 2 to the power of 1. And the first number is going to stand for 2 to the power of 2. Here, the first digit stands for read, the second digit stands for write, and the final digit stands for execute. So if we wanted to give the permissions of reading and executing a file but not writing a file, we would have 1 for read, we would have 0 for write, and we would have 1 again for execute. So how do we calculate the number? We're going to multiply the bottom number with the one in the middle. So we're going to multiply these 2 numbers together, and we're going to calculate the sum. So first we're going to have 2 to the power of 0 times 1, which is going to equal to 1. Then we're going to have 2 to the power of 1 times 0, which is going to equal to 0. And finally, we're going to have 2 to the power of 2, which is 4 times 1, which is equals to 4. And we're going to get the result 6. So 6 represents the permission to read and execute and not to write. Let's look at another example, which is going to only give read permissions. So we're going to have 1 for read, we're going to have 0 for write, and we're going to also have 0 for execute. So again, we're going to multiply. So we're going to have 0 plus 0 plus 4, which is going to equal to 4. That means the number 4 represents the ability or the permission to only read a file. Let's look at one final example, which is going to be the ability to only write to a file. So we're going to have our 3 digits. So we're going to have 0 for read, we're going to have 1 for write, and we're going to have 0 for execute. So we're going to multiply. So we're going to have 2 to the power of 0 times 0, which is 0. We're going to have 2 to the power of 1 times 1, which is 2. And finally, we're going to have 2 to the power of 2 times 0, which is also 0. Then we're going to get 2. So let's say in our file, we wanted to give the owner the permission to read and execute. So we're going to have 6. And we want to give the group the permission to only write. So we're going to have 2. And finally, we're going to give the other users the permission to only read to a file. So we're going to have 4. So this is the number we get, which is 624. Now we can use this number to change the permissions of a given file. Now back in our terminal, we're going to use the number we got. So we're going to have the chmod command followed by the number, which was 624, and we're going to put in the file name. Now if we list our current directory, we're going to get the following permissions. So for our isUpper file, we changed the owner's permissions to be able to read and write. We changed the group's permission to only write, and we changed the other users to read. So this is another way of changing permissions of a file. We've seen 2 different ways to change permissions of a file, so this is a basic introduction to shell permissions. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily programming videos.